Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. My name is Phyllis O'Neill, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am this morning's worship associate. If today is your first time with us, we'd love to get to know you. Right after the service, you're invited to our welcome room, which is right down the hallway on the first front entry on 13th side. Right after service. And if you're online, the link to our visitor form is being dropped into the chat now. As you enter the sanctuary and at any point during the service, you can write your joys and sorrows in the book, light a candle, or place a stone in the water on the table here just to the side of the organ. Those joining from home can write prayers of joys and sorrows into the Zoom chat, which will be open until the start of the sermon. And during the week, anyone can go to the pastoral care portal on our website and let our ministers know you need support. We gather in worship to find meaning and to live more deeply. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond us, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your image of the holy, we're glad you're here. We light the chalice, symbol of your Unitarian Universalist faith, with these words from Reverend Suzelle Lynch. Our community is filled with beauty. When you open your door to greet me, that's where beauty begins. When you share with me what's important to you, beauty is there as I listen. When we join hands to practice compassion, beauty's heart blooms like a flower. When we teach or learn or work for justice, beauty is abounding, sparks of joy and all. Let's light the chalice for beauty now, the beauty we seek, the beauty we share, the beauty we nurture together. And now let us say together the words of our mission, which affirm our shared purpose. Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you today. My name is Jen Youngsun Rue. You can call me Rev Jen. I use the pronouns she and her. You know, we introduce ourselves that way because it's an invitation for others to freely tell us what they would like to be called and how they would like to be known. All of us want this kind of freedom, right? To clearly name ourselves and to clearly let others know what we would like to be called, to tell someone our preferences for pronouns or no pronouns, to tell someone that these are the accommodations I'm going to need to belong to this community and to have those statements taken very seriously. Today is Harvey Milk Day, May 22nd, to honor the first openly gay politician in California and leader of the American Civil Rights Movement. Harvey Milk was assassinated in 1979. Let us today set aside this time to remember all of the LGBTQIA+ ancestors who would not be silenced. Let us also celebrate how far we have come We now see Corinne Jean-Pierre as our first openly gay press secretary, as well as all those others, including people in this room, continuing to fight for human rights. And so come, let us celebrate all the wonderful, wonderful, amazing ways to experience human beingness. Come, let us worship together.
So our story today was written by the Reverend Otto O'Connor, a white, openly transgender man who serves the Unitarian Universalist Church in Malden, Massachusetts. On a holy night in 1969, in an inn, also known as a bar, called the Stonewall Inn, a basement which had no running water nor any safe fire exits, queer people of many colors and kinds danced together, for it was the only place where they were allowed to dance, at least permitted to by the mafia who owned the building.
In those days, it was common for the police to frequent this inn, not to join in the dance, the underground celebration, but to send the dancers home and make arrests. When they would arrive, the lights would go on, the people would be lined up, and then all those in drag, all those who were trans, all those without proper identification, they were arrested and taken into custody.
But on this holy night, the early morning of June 28, the people said, "Not tonight." As they called to them to line up, the trans women refused to go, and the police began to beat and arrest them. And as the people spilled out from the bar onto the street, Christopher Street, a crowd grew to watch.
And then, as trans women, lesbians, and gay men were getting arrested, a yell came from the crowd, "Gay power!" And as a trans woman was shoved, she shoved back, and the crowd began throwing bottles at the wagon, and suddenly it erupted. For once the people didn't line up. For once the people said, "No, no more, we've had enough." It was almost as if that night, being pulled out of the darkness of the underground at Stonewall Inn one too many times, they said, "I'm ready to be seen." On this holy night, when the power of the oppressed rippled through the streets of New York, when queer people said no more, our world would never be the same.
53 years ago, it was illegal to be gay, to be trans, to dance, and to love and to celebrate. And now, only 53 years later, here we are celebrating at church. Gay and straight together, queer and straight together, trans and cis together, all in this together. And so as we hear these stories of life and love and defiance and celebration, let us also remember and pay tribute to our movement ancestors. Many of them trans women of color who led the first rebellion that night, Marcia P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera. Bring your whole selves, your gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer selves, your drag queen, butch and femme, cross-dressing, nail-painting, tutu-wearing selves, your genderqueer, gender-fluid, agender, pansexual, quilt bag selves, and all the other identities that are and will be. And let's have a celebration, because joy is a rebellion too. And this church is queer, queer and fabulous. Amen.
For some of you very busy folks, I know that these few minutes in a Sunday worship service are precious times of silence for you. And so let's enter into a time of meditation There's a definition of meditation that I really like, and that is to enjoy the company of oneself. So find a comfortable position and relax. Feel yourself firmly planted on the earth and at the same time rising to the stars. Roots hold me close and wings set me free. Begin this loving kindness meditation with yourself. You've been running around all week thinking about other people. Right now, think about what your heart's desire is. What part of you longs to be free? What part of you longs to be loved? What part of you is tired of being ignored? Give those parts some attention today. For all the parts that need a little more care and tenderness, say to yourself, may I be happy. May I be well. May I be at peace. And now think about the people who are closest to you, the ones you love the most, the people who are easy for you to love. See their faces in your mind's eye. I hope they're all doing very well. But you're worried about some of them, some of your friends and your closest family members. They're struggling. And so we open our hearts to them and we send them wishes. We say to them, may you be happy. May you be well. May you be at peace. And now let's expand our awareness to all of the people and the beings that we're surrounded by every day. The people we see on the road and in the stores, in our neighborhoods and the schools. Maybe we don't know the exact particulars of their lives, but we know just as a person walking upon this earth, we know that they all have troubles. And so we reach out to them and say, may you be happy. May you be well. May you be at peace. And maybe there is someone in your life right now that you're having a prickly relationship with. Maybe they are in your household. Maybe they're in your workplace. Maybe they're in your family and you've been estranged for a long time. Bring those people to mind and say to them, may you be happy. May you be well. May you be at peace. We pray for all those near and far who are struggling today and who are suffering. suffering for lack of the most basic human necessities, suffering from loneliness and isolation, to all the beings that we are related to. May they be well. May they be happy. May they be at peace.
So, good morning to you all. My preferred name is Agnes, and my legal and professional name is Amy Marsh. My pronouns are Z and Zir. And this month of May, dedicated at UUCE to Nurturing Beauty, also contains some key dates and observances for LGBTQIA++ people, like every month, really. And Reverend Jen asked me, as a new worship associate volunteer, if I would be willing to say a few words of reflection on LGBTQIA++ people and history today. And though I am no historian, I am capable of reflection. But from the UU Soul Matters Worship Research publication for May 2022, we do have some dates and observances, and they include May 17th, International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. May 19th, Agender Pride Day. And this is also Malcolm X's birthday, so yes, he was a Taurus. May 22nd, Harvey Milk's birthday in 1930. Harvey Milk was known as the mayor of Castro Street in San Francisco. He died in 1978, shot by the same man who also killed Mayor George Moscone. May 24th is Pansexual and Panromantic Awareness and Visibility Day. Now, this next date wasn't in Soul Matters, but you should all know that May 28th celebrates a certain nearly universal human activity that the former US Surgeon General, Dr. Jocelyn Elders, was fired for mentioning back in 1994. So there's some history for you. However, in that list, there was another date that stood out for me. And that was May 15th, 1969, which was the first documented HIV death in North America. History is made of people and memories, as well as dates and events. And it does contain beauty as well as terror. And the person who helped me to nurture my own sense of beauty was my late uncle, David Edmund Oldsrath. He was a dream of an uncle, bookish, cultured, witty, and so very kind. And he lived and loved in the liberated heart of San Francisco's gay Castro district. He died May 6, 1986, age 56, in the first wave of the deadly AIDS pandemic. And it's odd to realize I've now lived 11 longer than he did. So David Rath was an English teacher at San Francisco City College, and he'd been closeted during his entire teaching career. But as one of the first two teachers to be diagnosed with AIDS, he found himself outed in the most humiliating way. And he was diagnosed a few weeks after my marriage. So my husband and I promptly moved into his building to be there for him as long as he lasted. He knew that he was destined for rapid, ugly, disheveled decline. He who had such a refined sensibility and aesthetics, he was the sort of person who put plastic lids under jars in the refrigerator to contain spills. His last words to me from his hospital bed was to remind me to toss out the milk in his refrigerator. And yes, he had a horror of spoilage, including his own. But I knew this was a kind of shorthand message to remind me to see to all of his affairs as his trustee and executor. My uncle and I shared a history of living in the Castro. The neighborhood's traumas were on our doorstep. We shared in the neighborhood's spirit, its wins and joys. Halloween in the Castro, in the years before it was infiltrated by brutish onlookers, was like nothing else on earth. Likewise, the horror of the Milk and Moscone murders and the collective grief and rage that resulted was also unlike anything I'd ever imagined. And then there was, still ongoing to this day, the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Castro Street had always been vibrant, It was always thronged with young men who had no interest in the likes of me, which was something I always find quite comforting, actually. But then the young men aged and sickened and died with a rapidity that was shocking. Whole chunks of people were gone, just like that. Castro Street felt like a never-ending funeral. In those days, I was working at Research and Decisions, a company which did the very first surveys of gay men for the Department of Public Health, in an effort to craft the public health messages that would enable men to opt for safer practices and maybe even avoid the bathhouses. I do remember some of the bitter debates over the bathhouse closures, places my uncle had liked to visit every Sunday afternoon. I would see him from my window wearing a jaunty cap, spring in his step, to catch the bus that would take him away from grading student papers. He never knew that he was going to his doom. None of us ever do, I guess. Our own histories bump up against everyone else's histories. Where did you go? Who did you see? Who do you love? And sometimes that's okay. Other times, not so much. In these pandemic times, when we have to make hard choices about where to breathe instead of where and whom to touch, I feel all the truth of visionary activist Carolyn Casey's description of the here and now as, quote, a time of dire beauty, unquote. And I offer here a fragment from one of my uncle's poems titled Time Being and dated just a few months before his death. He wrote, "The lucky, living, ruminate on morns, not yet arrived, thus not yet in the know, while others wait for their sure cue to go." Since my Uncle David isn't here to say it, though we'd surely agree, let's resolve to make merry while we can, and to also act with generous courage so that others may make merry too, in May or any other month, however dire. So May was his month. He was also a Taurus. Blessed be.
So I don't remember which president it was exactly, but I do remember one of them visiting a memory care unit in a nursing home one year, and he bent down to talk to a gentleman who was in a wheelchair, and to the gentleman he said, "Do you know who I am?" And the gentleman said, "I don't, but if you go to the nurses' station, they'll tell you." It seems that no other question has occupied the human mind as much as this one. Who am I? For some people, identity questions revolve around how I look, or social, economic status, or what job we hold. But questions of gender and sexuality, those are big parts of our identity, and especially so because we seem to have built a society all the way around prescribing what it means to be this gender or that gender, or to express your sexuality in this way or that way. There are all sorts of norms, meaning rights and wrongs. Do this, don't do that, stay in these boxes, don't go outside here. For some reason, we want to know when a baby first arrives into our community, well, what gender is it? I don't know why this is the primary thing that we want to know about a brand new human that's arrived. But that's the thing we seem to want to know. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? But really, don't we want to know, like, where this child came from? Who are your ancestors? Who are the people that brought you here, that survived all those generations and allowed you to be here today? Don't we want to know, well, what kind of community are you being brought into? Who are the people who are going to teach you and nurture you and tell you the stories that are going to help you to stay connected, accountable, responsible? Who are the people who are going to call you out and call you back? Aren't those the questions we really want to know about a newborn babe? They say that not long before his execution, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a lot in prison about that question, who am I? People were saying all kinds of things about him, and he was asking, is that really me? He wrote, who am I, this or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others and before myself, a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Who am I, he asked. They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, though, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Now, I know that not everybody shares the same notion of God, so that particular phrase maybe didn't carry as much meaning for you as others. But you may be able to say, O thou knowest, O love, I am thine. O love, you know me, and I am thine. Or whatever you consider to be your higher power, insert that word there. Or maybe you would just rather leave it nameless. Whoever I am, thou knowest, I am thine. I recently heard someone say that we're living in an age of unsettled identities. And I really feel the truth of that statement. More and more of us are biracial, for example. And so having to choose between the white caucus discussion group and the BIPOC, people of color group, doesn't make sense when it comes to those identities. And even young people especially are struggling a lot with identity. Who am I? Who am I going to be? Who should I be? Even those of us who are on the other side of middle age are asking that question too. The soul-shaking impact of the global pandemic has us all rethinking what we thought we knew about who we are in relation to our ancestors, our families, our nation's history, our communities of choice. So some of you know Alex Capitan. Z was one of the consultants who came here to help this congregation, I think. And Alex is one of the collective co-leaders of the Transforming Hearts Collective, a transgender and queer lifelong Unitarian Universalist. Alex does interfaith ministry to help queer and trans people connect to religion and spirituality. And Z once pointed out that it's really not a matter of identity. I mean, as I've done all this talking about identity, really what is more important is the matter of how we experience the world. It's all about how we orient ourselves to one another and toward the creation as a whole. So you know the most famous creation story is the one told in Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. And after interpreting for millennia, interpreting its images in a particular way, in a dualistic and binary way, LGBTQIA plus theologians are finding more expansive perspectives that help us all. So for as long as there have been humans, there have been people who fall outside this man-made category of genders and certain sexualities. Thousands of years ago, before the books of the Hebrew Bible were written, there were creation stories and writings from Mesopotamia, referring to humans who are created with sex organs that are not immediately identifiable as either female or male. And the Talmud and the Mishnah, compilations of Jewish law, also include lots of examples of individuals who have characteristics of more than one sex and those whose characteristics change over time. There's a wonderful scholar from the United Methodist tradition named M. Barclay, who identifies as neither male nor female. And M. Barclay reminds us that when Genesis talked about night and day, the separation of night and day and land and water, these verses didn't mean that there was only land or water or heaven or earth. We have dusk, and we have the period of dawn. We have watersheds. We have marshes. We have water that is brackish, both salty and fresh. We have layers of atmosphere, and we have beautifully made humans, all kinds of them. Barclay says, to say that you're non-binary innately suggests that there is a binary. And my whole point, says Barclay, is that there is no such thing. We've created this formula and forced ourselves to understand gender on it. So instead of seeing people on a spectrum, on a linear spectrum, Barclay and many other non-binary people identify as something completely different. I am convicted to say about my own non-binary identity that I'm not in between, but more. When we open the gender boxes, it's more like a scattering than a line. I think a lot of us maybe have learned that sexuality and gender is on a continuum. But by charting our identities along a two-dimensional geometry, that has limitations. And so perhaps we should turn away from that particular shape and lift our heads to the stars. A multitude of sexualities and gender identities existing in 3Ds, sprinkled throughout the cosmos like stardust. What a marvel that we can even talk about stuff like this in church, and that we can celebrate all the different ways of being human without the baggage of outdated and oppressive norms. But it hasn't been that long. And I think it's important to remember, as we are being reminded of, that the gains that we have made are not necessarily guaranteed. The gay rights movement began sometime in the 50s. Stonewall was in the late 1970s. And then that was the time, around the late 70s, early 80s, when UU congregations first started seeing gay and lesbian, I have to say white gay and lesbian ministers serving UU congregations. And so some of the first were Mark Bellatini, Douglas Morgan Strong, Mark DeWolf, Barbara Peskin, Kim Crawford Harvey, Lindy Ramsden, and later Sean Dennison served in Salt Lake City as our first openly transgender minister. So when I first joined the UU Church back in the early 90s, the people were actively voicing in that congregation a fear of becoming known as the gay church. Now, this church had been there for over 100 years, and so they wanted to be known as the Unitarian, the historical Unitarian church, where the famous William Ellery Channing preached. I wish we could have fully understood what a solace we could have been, what a sanctuary we could have truly been if we had been courageous enough to declare ourselves a gay church back then, a queer church, and said that loud and proud. This was a church that was willing to put on drag shows in the parish hall on Saturday nights, but when it came to declaring something so bold within its temple walls, we still had a long way to go. And because the 1990s were some of the most brutal, heartbreaking years in the story of gay rights, I still feel a lot of sorrow that we missed an opportunity to minister to people because we didn't want our neighbors calling us a gay church. As a brand new UU at that time, this incident taught me a few things. One is how entrenched supremacy culture is just embedded in our Unitarian Universalist tradition. And second, how important it is for the church to care first and foremost for the brokenhearted. We live in times of terrible turmoil. Millions of people are feeling attacked because of the way they look, the way they dress, whatever their reproductive situation is, what their immigrant status is, what their religion is, what their diverse capabilities are. But here, within the sheltering walls of this community, we strive to create a place that is sheltered from that turmoil, because everyone needs a place where they can feel safe and free. Here, within the bonds of our covenants, we promise each other spiritual support and sustenance. A few weeks ago, we were pleased to welcome our new lay pastoral care associates, our LPAs. Along with the ministers, we are here to listen to all of your stories without judgment and without giving you advice. We can help you to figure out the confusing landscape of this world. Here we also have an affinity group for BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and we have one for LGBTQIA+. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, non-binary, queer, intersex, asexual, agender, and aromantic folks ages 18 and above are invited to meet together here in person and online simultaneously on the third Sunday of every month, starting at 4 p.m. We also hold a community grief circle every month where we can freely name all those things that we have loved and lost. Because naming what we have lost must come first before we jump into action, before we move headlong into the next task. We have to be willing to stop and feel the broken hearts. And this includes naming all the parts of us that deserve to be loved, but didn't get that love. It includes the grief that is handed from one generation to the next. It includes the grief felt by our neighbors. Though they're thousands of miles away, we know, we can imagine what it might feel like for them. And we know that when we stop to mourn with them, then all of the people stop together to declare our human decency and our human connection. That murderous killing at the grocery store in Buffalo was an attack on every person who knows that they are connected to the whole, connected to the whole family of beings, connected by one single love. And so on this day, when we mourn and celebrate the lives of Avnas's Uncle David, and Harvey Milk, and Marsha P. Johnson, and Sylvia Rivera, and countless others, we add the names of the 10 who died last week. Roberta Drury, Margus Morrison, Andre McNeil, Aaron Salter, Geraldine Tolley, Celestine Cheney, Hayward Patterson, Catherine Macy, Pearl Young, Ruth Whitfield. Way back in 1919, 1920, 1921, there were organized massacres that took place during the Ukrainian national uprising, and about 100,000 Jews were murdered during that time. These pogroms were spontaneous and popular and rose largely from the people because an expression, a popular phrase, had made its way from the ground up to people's lips. No more Jews. And today, the words, "They will not replace us," sounds very much like that. And with the amplifying power of Twitter and Facebook and TikTok, we can see how quickly those few words can rise to the lips of millions. And so our work as a UU congregation, networked and associated with all the other UUs around the world, we can be an important place of respite for people feeling the pressure of mounting hateful voices. Because UUs are so focused on action sometimes, though, wanting to advocate and petition and protest and just go out there and do something, we forget that what is most needful is to tend to the invisible spiritual wounds of homophobia and transphobia and racism and poverty. Our buildings and our people, our community are uniquely outfitted for the tender care of those souls. It's also, this community is also able to tend to those who identify with the majority as well, wanting to acknowledge how dislocating it feels, how disorienting it feels to see so much change in our country, so much change in our land. All we can say over and over to each other, to our neighbors and even people in our families, is just saying over and over, no one is taking your place. You are not being replaced. Remember who you are, that you are unique and fabulous. You are queer in your own wonderful way. You are created in the image of all that is sacred in this vast world. Remember that you are part, just one part, of a vast human family that, despite everything that has gone wrong, is evolving and learning how to love more and how to love better. These are times of dire beauty. I love that phrase, and it's so true. We have been able to see incredible success over the last few decades. Just in 2020, there was a very pivotal decision in the Supreme Court that says that the Civil Rights Act does protect employees against discrimination if they are gay or transgender. It was a huge, huge move and a huge victory for us. It's important always to remember who we are as a religious people, bound to each other, bound to the entire human family, and committed to the one love that binds us all together. May it be ever so. Amen. Don't forget church picnic at noon today at Alton Baker Park, shelter number 2. Bring your own lunch, and we will get to know each other better, and we'll talk, and we'll have dessert together. As we extinguish this chalice, let's say the words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now, as you go into this brand new day, into this brand new week, full of potential and promise, remember who you are, a beloved child of life itself. Go in peace, everyone. Go in love.